Hello there. This is your host, Marcus. And what you're going to be hearing now is the first part of two parts of a bonus edition of Cinphomaniac. I've been teasing this a little bit, but this week, the week of August 13th, that's the Friday of this week, I'm recording this Saturday. Saw the release, the international release of Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0 Thrice Upon a Time. And if that title's already like, what? Strap in. Because this first part is going to be me attempting to explain, possibly for Dana's sake, if she wants to give this a listen, what the hell is Evangelion? Why am I even talking about this? I mean, I talked about my love of this in the context of Hideaki Anno when we went over Miyazaki's Nausicaa on a mainline episode a couple weeks ago. And yeah, I said a lot there and spoke the sincerity of what I felt Anno does. And that was before I even saw this movie. But Evangelion is a franchise that has come to mean a lot to me. I was a latecomer to it. I only got into it summer 2019 when it came to Netflix, and there was a lot of hype just even with that release. It was something I had heard about for years. In fact, I took a course in college at NYU where we broke down Japanese animation and its impact on Japan's culture, and it was kind of like a sort of a cultural analysis and media class. That was a cool class that I was just like, it counts for credits, and, we'll watch like Akira and stuff, movies that I already seen and was like very familiar with. But we actually covered Evangelion, except me being a bad student, I didn't actually do my work and watch it and skipped class a bunch, so I completely missed out on whatever the fuck we were actually going to be talking about there. Maybe we didn't even watch anything from it. It was just a reference point. So, but yeah, so I knew about it for a long time. It's debatable, I think, depending on your perspective, whether I should be lumped into a category that's becoming less and less meaningful, I feel like, in modern Western culture, which is, am I an anime stan or otaku or whatever? Detailing my whole history of that would be a whole separate conversation. I don't keep up with new stuff is what I really am getting at. So for all those people watching like Attack on Titan and Demon Slayer and all those, I've never seen any of that. Never. Not a frame. Trailers, I got videos, things. I guess I've seen like little tiny pieces, but I have no idea what it is. I couldn't explain the first thing to you about any of that stuff. Doesn't seem like it'd be my thing. I mean, again, like my interest in this stuff tends to be coming from other things related, like video games or just other points of cultural discussion, filmmaking. I think to be a cinephile, I don't care where you're at, and not be familiar with Studio Ghibli or Miyazaki's films, for example, is a sin. And there's almost like a Miyazaki-only cliche to this type of thing, but I'm putting that aside for now. The point is, Evangelion was something I knew had quite a reputation. I'd never seen it, didn't really know anything about it other than it tangentially involved mechs and Christian theology, which I think that aspect of it was a bit overplayed, because when you see it, and as I'm about to start explaining, it's something that's like it's very directly referenced visually, but like to actually understand how it relates to the story and the themes, you have to go into some deep dive rabbit holes to really unpack that, and it's somewhat debatable whether that's even necessary, depending on your perspective. Anyways, yes, so I'm going to try to unpack what Evangelion is. Before they do that, I'll just iterate what part 2 is. Part 2 is going to be my actual extended, I don't know how long it'll be because I haven't recorded it yet. I'm probably going to follow up this immediately with it. Sort of review of the movie, the 3.0 plus 1.0, or Shin Evangelion, or Shin Evangelion Gekko Joban, or whatever the hell it's called. I don't speak Japanese. Now, yeah, I want to break all that down. It's going to be, when I say review, I mean, it's not going to have necessarily the level of intense research and analysis and discussion that I normally have, because I won't have Dana. At least that's, as of I'm recording this, that's the intention. Maybe I'll be able to convince her to come along and let me spiel the whole thing, but we're not going to use one of our normal episode slots for that. Even though the new film is a film, because of the amount of immense context that I think is really necessary to discuss it, it's like, I don't think it really belongs in the main feed. And I also don't want the main feed, or in general, if people just think, oh, are you guys just like a 30, 40, 50 more percent anime or animation podcast? And I'm like, no, not really. Whether that's a turn off to people or not, or a turn on, I don't, depends, I guess. But that's not the intention of Cinphomaniac, so I don't want to get that confused, but it is something I'm very passionate about, and Evangelion's taken up so much of my mind share, not only this week, but like literally for months leading up to this point, that it's actually distracted me from going to the movie theaters to see new movies that are very zeitgeist, like The Suicide Squad, etc. And I'm thinking about maybe covering some of those on our regular episode for this week. We're also going to be releasing the episode on The Servant. That might be coming out before anyone hears this. I suspect it will. That's from the archive. So we're going to go back and release that. And yeah, that's going to be an amazing conversation, because The Servant is one of my absolute favorite movies. Perhaps it has a little bit in common with some ideas in Evangelion. We'll see. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to try to explain Evangelion. It's not going to be one of those Evangelion explained in 5 minutes, though. I'm not going to try to speed run it. I'm going to take a very sort of direct, point by point approach to kind of unpacking this whole thing. So, what's Evangelion? Well, first we have to start with the original product. That being the 1995 TV series Neon Genesis Evangelion, a 26-episode series that came out in Japan and was dubbed into English by ADV Films not too long after its original run in Japan. Like I said, that's not the dub I came to know. I came to know the Netflix English dub, which I know a lot of fans have some complaints about. But yeah, this is not going to be a dub discussion cast. I'll just say that right now. And I recommend people watching in Japanese for the most part anyway, unless they just prefer dubs. So, what is Neon Genesis Evangelion, the TV series? Well, let's break down the story, because really, in order to even talk about Rebuild, which this final movie that we're talking about, 3.0 plus 1.0, that's the final film of the Rebuild tetralogy. There's 4 movies. But those 4 movies were the successor to the original TV series and the 1997 film, The End of Evangelion, what that is, I will be explaining shortly, or however long it takes me to get there. But Neon Genesis Evangelion, the TV series, starts right from the first episode as this story of a 14-year-old boy named Shinji Ikari. Shinji Ikari, when you meet him, he's arriving in the city of Tokyo 3. It's the year 2015. Remember, 2015 was the future when this came out by 20 years, right? So this is supposed to be a near-future sci-fi anime series, okay? Now, Shinji Ikari arrives in this city called Tokyo 3, implying there's a Tokyo 2. And, what happened to the original Tokyo? Well, I might be getting to that. He arrives in the city of Tokyo 3 based off a letter and a provocative photo provided by Misato Katsuragi, who he's meant to meet. Now, when you meet Misato, she is one of my favorite characters. She's drawn with somewhat purple hair, or very purple hair, depending on the art. And she's just like a cool older woman in her late 20s, approaching 30, who works for an organization called NERV. And NERV is the same organization that Shinji's father, who he's estranged from, Gendo Ikari, works for. Now, the day he arrives in Tokyo 3 to meet Misato, who's going to bring him to his father for an unknown purpose. He has no idea why he's being brought to his father, because he's, like I said, he's estranged from his father. He's been raised by a private tutor, totally with no mother. So from his lifestyle perspective, he's an orphan. He has a father, but they haven't seen each other in years. And this is a boy going through puberty, so you can imagine. The day he arrives to meet Misato, a giant monster is attacking the city. That monster is called an angel. Now, all the angels have names, but honestly, I didn't prepare a list, and I get them confused all the time. I think the first one is Sachiel. Doesn't matter. You don't even learn the names of these angels till halfway through the original TV series, so all the Eva nerds can chill. So this giant monster, when I say giant monster, the design of these monsters is very interesting, and as we'll talk about, the design varies greatly from angel to angel, because there's more than one of them. The first day, only one angel attacks at a time. So this first angel attack, it's just one. It's just Sachiel or whatever. Giant, kind of like, you're not even kind of sure what he's made of. It has this big red orb in the center of its chest and a sort of strange, almost mask-like face with two circular black eyes and a sort of like a point down that resembles a nose, I guess. There's no mouth, nothing. It's just a giant, like, tall as a skyscraper thing hulking through the city, and there's a bunch of military planes trying to destroy it, sending every bit of firepower they have at it, and it's doing nothing to this thing. Part of that is that you see it generates some weird kind of force field called an AT field. I'm going to get into explaining AT fields, and it's really important coming up. There's the giant force field, and in that giant force field, it's able to block even like somewhat nuclear weapons, like these thing called M2 mines or whatever. So that you see that there's a whole bunch of UN, United Nations Defense Force people, and the Japanese Special Defense Force, or all that, JDF, kind of all the brass trying to figure out how do we destroy this thing. It's attacking the city. And you get the sense that they've known that this was going to happen at some point. And here's the day of reckoning. This angel's arrived, seemingly out of nowhere. They're trying to destroy it. Nothing. Meanwhile, Shinji, having just met Misato, she pulls up in a car and it's like, hey, Shinji, get in. They're working their way to Nerve headquarters. Now, Nerve headquarters, as they see, in order to reach it, they have to go underground. And underground is this thing called the Geofront. The Geofront is a giant sort of like inverted sphere, like you're in the interior of a sphere. It's like a underground tiny moon within the planet Earth, under the ground, underneath the city of Tokyo 3, which is, of course, in Japan. And inside there, it kind of looks like almost like there's earth, like there's plants and stuff growing there, and there's like a pyramid, and that pyramid is the Nerve HQ, right? So Misato's taking him there to meet Shinji's father, Gendo, who is the commander of Nerve. He's the head of the whole thing. So it's Gendo who's actually in the same sort of war room command center called the Central Dogma. Why it's called that, I probably won't even get to. But with all these generals, and they're like, what do we do? And Gendo's like, you know what to do. The only thing that will work to defeat this angel are the Evangelions. And they're like, well, I thought the Evangelion was damaged. And they're referring to a prototype Evangelion called Unit 0. Unit 0 is out of commission, and its pilot is injured. So if you're starting to think about what's happening here, you're going to realize maybe this has to do with Shinji. Now, Shinji arrives at Nerve and is brought to this giant purple robot that's Evangelion Unit 1. And his father comes up and is like, Shinji, I called you here because I need you. You need to pilot this Evangelion. That's the only way we're going to be able to save the city and stop this angel who's attacking and destroying everything. And Shinji's reaction to this is like, no way. You see him, like, this is the important thing you got to understand about Shinji and his defining fact of his character. Shinji is a scared little boy. He is not some brave hero. He is not some, like, oh, wow, I get to pilot a robot. Cool. It's not like a typical, mech series hero. He's immediately terrified, and he can't even not only is he being asked to pilot, but it's also confronting his father for the first time in years. He was hoping that his father was calling him there because he wanted to reconnect with him. And instead, he's like, I have no desire to talk to you. I need you to do something for me, and you either do it or get the hell out of here. So part of his denial and refusal to pilot the Eva is also his way of trying to stick up to his father. Sounds like he has courage, but just deny his father because he's so hurt and confused and scared. And, Misato, along with Misato's, coworker, the head of like the science and research section of NERV, Ritsuko Akagi, Dr. Ritsuko Akagi, and she's a blonde-haired, sort of femme fatale-esque looking woman with a mole on her under her eye, and wears makeup. Very interesting character. We're gonna hopefully talk a little bit about. But Ritsuko is the one showing him the Eva, and both her and Misato are like, Shinji, it doesn't matter what your opinion of your father is. You need to pilot this Eva because you're our only hope. It's like, Luke, you're our only hope. And that's confusing to Shinji. He's like, why me? Like, what do you mean? Like, why does it have to be me? And there's no explanation given for this at first. But there's just this insistence that it has to be Shinji to pilot this, that Shinji's the only one who can do it for some reason. Shinji refuses until he sees the other pilot, the pilot of Unit 0, the one who was injured. That's Rei Ayanami. Now, Rei Ayanami is a girl with blue hair. I keep talking about hair color, and it's only to point out the fact that, like, the setting of Eva and the design of Eva is not, like, one of those animes where everyone's got crazy hair. It's actually pretty normal, except for the fact that Misato has purplish hair. A character like Rei has blue hair, but she also has this weird pale skin, like right away, and red eyes. Right away, you're supposed to be like, she's a little different than a normal person. She's like kind of strange and alien in some weird way. But the point is she's injured. She's bleeding, and they're trying to wheel her in to pilot the unit instead of Shinji, since Shinji refuses. And at that point, Shinji just looking at her and being more scared for her in that moment than he is for himself, finally works up the courage to say, I'm going to pilot the Eva. So Shinji gets in the Eva, gets in the robot. And right away he tries to fight the angel, and it's like this weird thing where he's learning how Evas work, which is, well, I'll get into this. Evas aren't piloted with mechanical controls exactly. There's, like, when you see the inside of the cockpit, which is called the entry plug, it's like this capsule that, like, inserts itself into the spine of the Evangelion unit, and the pilot's in there. Normally they wear a plug suit, which is like a special, like, tight, super tight, kind of latexy suit, and there's these two little things they put on their head, and those are presumably meant to, like, read their brain waves, because the way the Evas work is through a somewhat psychic or mental connection between the pilot and the unit itself. See, the Evas, as even this first battle will start to reveal to Shinji, are not exactly robots at all. They're actually biological beings that have metal plates around them, that are actually later revealed to be restraints of a kind on them. And these organic giant beings have souls. Now, I'm putting souls in sort of air quotes here because there's a lot of talk of souls in Evangelion, and obviously most people, there's an intuitive or cultural understanding of souls as these things that everyone has, and they have a religious connotation, and Evangelion doesn't necessarily get away from that, but I think it's important, given the context that Eva is like this sort of sci-fi thing, to understand that how I would say the soul, if you want to get just very science, or not science, but just sort of obscure as much spirituality as possible, is there's sort of cognitive existence. There is a consciousness to these things that syncs, because there's all this talk about synchronization. The pilot has to synchronize with the Eva. So their consciousness have to kind of meld together in a sense. And it's the pilots who's in the lead, so they don't really exactly sense the consciousness of the Eva, but the Eva's consciousness senses theirs and responds to it and acts in accordance and matching with it. And this is what allows the pilot to control the Eva. And so Shinji fights the angel, the giant monster called an angel. Why it's called an angel, I'll kind of get into. He fights it, and during that fight, he's struggling because this is the first time he's ever doing it. He's thrust right into the heat of the action. He doesn't exactly know what he's doing. And the angel's kicking his ass, at which point, the angel gets basically taken down, And right as he otherwise would be getting finished, the Evangelion awakens, what they call going berserk. And it starts to act on its own will and act in a very sort of primal, violent, kind of bestial-like way. And it attacks the angel and is able to rip out its core, which allows it to destroy it. And that's how Shinji is able to defeat the first angel that attacks Tokyo 3. From there, Shinji goes on to live with Masato, and they kind of develop this sort of surrogate mother-son relationship, which is very complicated because, like I said, Misato's not that old. She's a young woman. She's a heavy drinker. She's basically an alcoholic. And right away, there's this sort of strange sexual tension, at least from Misato's end, as though she has some desires or need to suppress desires to use sex towards Shinji, or her sex appeal at Shinji. And at first you're kind of like, is this just playful? Is this just a joke? Is this just her being somewhat inappropriate? But as I'll discuss, there's unfortunately a bit more to it. And these ties deeply with the themes of Evangelion, which I'm going to get to. So yeah, Shinji starts living with Masato, and basically from there, because I don't want to get too bogged down trying to recap the whole plot of a 26-episode series. Basically from there, the way the original series starts to run is, Shinji, how he adjusts to his new life as an Evangelion pilot who's called into action every time one of these angels attacks, because the first angel was not the last angel. More and more of these angels keep showing up, seemingly out of nowhere, to attack Tokyo 3. Why they're focusing on Tokyo 3? This is an important question. Because presumably the whole world's under threat. Certainly the whole world is funding NERV under the idea that that these angels are a threat. Now, in order to better set the context, I realize I didn't explain this yet. This setting, this 2015, at the time future setting, is kind of a post-apocalyptic setting. Now, it doesn't feel that way. Tokyo 3 is a very developed city. Everything in the world seems relatively fine, at least in this version of the Evangelion, the Neon Genesis. But this is 15 years after, in the year 2000, there was something called the Second Impact. This was a catastrophic apocalyptic event that happened, where what the public was told was a meteor crashed into the Antarctica and caused sea levels to rise. And if you're thinking, like climate change, yes, this is definitely meant to be a metaphor for climate change. Caused sea levels to rise and a whole bunch of ecological disasters to befall mankind. And this caused eventually basically half of the world's population, sound like Avengers, to die over the next few years after this happened. So Tokyo 3 and the rest of the world, they exist as a response to a world that has vastly changed. There's like, Shinji is part of the post-Second Impact generation. People like Masato and Ritsuko, Akagi, and another character you meet named Ryoji Kaji, who is Masato's ex-boyfriend and lover, her, Ritsuko, and Ritsuko, Masato, and Kaji all went to university together. They're the generation that was preteen when Second Impact happened. Neon Genesis Evangelion is written before 9/11, but if you're thinking in an American context, this would be like my generation versus some of my younger cousins, like the difference between millennials and Gen Z. Actually Masato and Kaji and Ritsuko are actually all literally millennials. They're born in the late 80s in the timeline. So yeah, there's this generational divide. So Shinji doesn't know the world before the Second Impact, and neither does Rei, nor the third pilot that joins their group to round out this little trio of Evangelion pilots, Asuka Langley Soryu, who's a German-American, part Japanese girl with red hair, who's very, very abrasive and spunky kind of girl, but like a basically bully Shinji. She starts to live with Masato as well when she arrives in Japan with her Evangelion Unit 2. So Rei is the pilot of Unit 0, Shinji is the pilot of Unit 1, and Asuka is the pilot of Unit 2. And so, yeah, that becomes like a big chunk of like the middle of the 26 episodes is just Shinji, Asuka, and Rei kind of struggling to work together because of their conflicting personalities to fight these angel attacks as they keep happening. Right, so the second impact, like I said, I mentioned that people think it's caused by a meteor. The truth that they learn is it wasn't that. It was something that Nerve technically didn't exist yet. What the organization that preceded Nerve, an organization called Gehane, and they themselves are just a part of this larger thing called Seele. There's a lot of weird terms and verbs in German language here. This was something that Seele designed. Basically, what the second impact was the result of an experiment Seele was doing on Adam. Adam is the first angel. You see, so turns out, and this is where we get into the deep lore, but I'm going to try to unpack it now as quickly and cleanly as possible. Billions of years ago, before life began on Earth, a moon, not literally our moon, not Luna, a white moon as it's called in the series, the white moon of Adam, crash landed on Earth. Now, Adam and his moon are what's called a seed of life. Now, basically the idea is these sort of ancient alien beings called the first ancestral race sends out these seeds of life throughout the universe to basically begin life, to colonize or populate planets, essentially. And the Adam is one of those beings that's meant to basically, when the moon crashes, Adam's hibernating within inside it. Then once it awakens, before it even awakens, it births, it sends out its seed to create life. And the life that comes from Adam are the angels. Now, this is a good part to explain what angels are, or what makes them sort of unique. Angels are not made of matter that's not like our matter. It's matter that's more akin to, if you think of quantum physics, the idea of particles and waves. Their matter is much more wave adapt, meaning like stuff can just phase through them. They have like unusual properties because they're not tied to their solid state in the normal way we think of it. Angels, the way they behave often is like, can be tangible and tactile and all that stuff, but not necessarily. And this is why also the angels are so diverse in shape and size and construction, is because the seeds of life of Adam can take almost any form. They are these wave-based pieces of matter. They are functional, but they don't have souls in the traditional sense. They don't have consciousness. They don't have knowledge. They're just kind of these sort of existences, beast-like existences that, in the context of, their battles with the Avas can just do a lot of damage, right? But Adam birthed these seeds of life, so the angels were birthed by Adam, presumably all the way back when it first landed. However, Adam didn't fully awaken or activate like he was supposed to. And the reason for this was when this first ancestral race sent out these seeds, they sent out the seeds of life across the universe, and each is supposed to land on a different planet. But there's actually a second type of seed that the first ancestral race created called seeds of knowledge. And a seed of knowledge, a black moon, also crash landed on Earth after Adam. And that black moon contained the being known as Lilith. Now, Lilith is technically an angel like Adam, the second angel. But her seeds are not seeds of life, seeds of knowledge. And so when she landed on Earth, this caused, because of the way the first ancestral race designed this to work, there can only be one. So Adam impaled himself with his spear of Longinus. Now, the spears of Longinus, these big red, like pitchfork-looking things that angels, and actually originally angels, but later Evangelions can wield. And each moon not only carries their being like an Adam or a Lilith, but also a spear of Longinus, and the spear is that failsafe, that if they were by chance to somehow land on a planet with another seed on it, the protocol is that they impale themselves with their spear, basically causing them to deactivate. So this prevented Adam from ever fully awakening. So where that moon, Adam's white moon, his seed of life, first crash landed Earth, was in the Antarctic. So fast forward to the year 2000, billions of years later, life has sprung up on Earth, and that life originally came, the primordial soup that we think of all life came from, in the context of the Eva lore, is actually this substance called LCL that came from Lilith. Like Lilith's blood, essentially, is this stuff called LCL. Now, explaining LCL, I'll hold off on for a bit, because I want to explain it in the context of more how it affects the Eva pilots and other things that are more relevant. But just to understand that in terms of lore, all life comes from LCL, and all that LCL came from Lilith. So Lilith is the mother of all life on planet Earth, as we think of all the plants, animals, us, eventually humans, right? And the humans are the ultimate goal of Lilith. The humans are Lilith's true progeny. They have knowledge, they have consciousness, and it's unfortunately the way Sele thinks of it, the organization that I mentioned that was responsible for the second impact, which I'm about to explain. That makes us imperfect beings, because a true perfect being, a god, something akin to the true first ancestral race, would have both the seed of life and the seed of knowledge, meaning they would have both the consciousness that we have, but the sort of formless limitlessness of an angel, right? That can only come from a seed of life. So Adam still is on our planet this whole time, but he's just frozen in Antarctic. Sele, as an organization, stems from presumably some ancient religious cult that's been in our behind the scenes in our history for millennia, who are aware of this mythology that I just explained. And they've become even more aware when they discover this something called the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls exist in real life, but the idea in the Eva lore is that there were special pages of the Dead Sea Scrolls that only Sele knows about. And they explain all this stuff about angels and Adam and Lilith and the spears. And these scrolls predict the future. So they predicted that sometime around the new millennia, Adam would be awakened. And once Adam is awakened, so too would his children, the angels. They would begin to awaken. And the angels would attempt to destroy Lilith or unite with Lilith, which would cause an ultimate apocalyptic event that would will later become known as the third impact, right? Technically, this is before the second impact happened, but the awakening of Adam is the predicted second impact, and this would be followed by the angels awakening some years later, and they would basically fight to become the trigger for a third impact. Now, nominally, what Sele sets up NERV to do, and with help from the UN and all these public things, NERV is a public organization, Sele is not, keep that in mind, is they're supposed to be protecting the Earth from the annihilation of the third impact by stopping the angels, right? So the Evangelions are built to stop the angels. Later, you find out that this is not exactly true. NERV does need to kill all the angels, but they don't actually want to stop that, right? So the Evas are supposedly NERV's tools to stop the third impact from happening by defeating the angels. Really, Sele and NERV through Gendo, because Gendo's in league with Sele, though he has technically a separate plan that he's also working on, which I'll get to. They need to defeat the angels, but it's only to follow along with the predictions of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Dead Sea Scrolls predicted, these, whatever, I forget how many, 16 angels, 17 angels are gonna start attacking, and you need to defeat them all, and only then will you be able to reach this nirvana, which they call the project human instrumentality. So really, they don't want to stop the third impact, they just want to control it. And the way they're going to control it is by stopping the angels from initiating it and then start it on their own terms in a different way. Now, that's basically the long short of it. But getting back to what that second impact actually was because that was also predicted in Dead Sea Scrolls, in a similar way, Sele essentially did it on purpose to follow along with this prophesized event. They dug up Adam. They basically discovered the white moon. See, when I talked about the geofront, that thing under Tokyo 3, that giant sphere, that's actually the black moon of Lilith. That's in Japan where Tokyo 3 was built. So Nerve actually has custody of Lilith the whole time. They discovered this black moon of Lilith, and that's very much to do with how they're doing what they're doing over there, right? That's like a secret. People aren't supposed to know about that. But deep underground under Nerve HQ is Lilith herself. Meanwhile, Adam was dug up in the same way by digging up the white moon, a geofront, an identical seeming geofront in the Antarctic. And they discover Adam, and essentially they start doing an experiment on Adam to try to take control of him. And this is what causes the second impact. That experiment was, by the way, under the control of a Dr. Katsuragi, who's Misato's father. So Misato's father died, and Misato herself was there to witness this horrifying apocalyptic event, and she was the only survivor of it. But yeah, getting back to the present, or 2015, Shinji, Asuka, and Rei, they all are doing their thing, trying to fight these angels, and it looks like it's kind of going well, but one of the things that start to happen, this is what makes the original TV series Neon Genesis Evangelion so special, is for the first half of the show, I mean, there's a lot of interesting lore and stuff happening in the background, but really the show is a pretty straightforward mecha show, and there's interesting character development, and you know, things are being set up. It's not as if these things come out entirely out of nowhere. But midway through the show starts to shift its tone and interest, and it starts to be less about fighting, seeing Ava, you know, fight the angels, and much more about, one, developing this mystery around the lore, but two, more forwardly, a psychological examination of its lead characters, particularly of Shinji, but also of Misato and Asuka and Rei, and you start to go deep into their minds, and so the style of the series starts to shift into these more sort of internal, kind of avant-garde sort of little set pieces of imagery and editing and style mixing and all sorts of stuff to really get in the interior. Because like I said, you know, when I explained who Shinji was, he is this very afraid person. And that fear is a fear of others, a fear of being hurt by other people, a sort of like loner, introverted kind of thing. And where the series really starts to unpack itself is by incorporating a lot of ideas and representations and examinations through the lens of often quite Freudian psychology, which you start to realize the lore of Evangelion is also directly tied to. Like, a lot of these things are metaphors, but also made quite literal. So now I can explain AT fields. AT fields, the AT and AT field stands for Absolute Terror Field. Okay? And what they're talking about is the sort of solipsistic thing. Like, you are just, your consciousness is trapped within your body, or trapped within itself. You can never truly know your own existence beyond your own existence. So you don't know, you have no connection really to how other people perceive of you. It's separate from you. And that's why it scares you. You are isolated within yourself from other people, right? These are the walls between people. So the AT field, while literally a special sort of matter force field that angels can generate and Evangelions can generate, people, normal people technically have them too, literally in the sense of Ava, and metaphorically in the sense that we can all relate to, being those interior walls. So it's just a literal physical manifestation, the physical part being loose here because of this whole quantum wave stuff. Physical representation of the walls that separate us. Now this relates to a few things. This idea, if you go into Freudian, before you were just you separated from stuff, you were in your mother's womb. And even after you're born, your attachment to your mother stems from this, right? Mother is the first other, right? So Evangelions, as you'll find out, the souls in the Evas, because I remember I mentioned they have, quote, souls. In this sense, the soul is more literal. The souls in the Eva are the souls of the pilot's dead mothers. Or in the case of Rei, it's a little special, but I'll just focus on Shinji and Asuka for a moment. Shinji's mother, who he didn't know because she died when he was 3, or she didn't exactly die. She was used in an experiment to create Evangelion Unit 1, the Eva Shinji pilots. And this bonded her soul to the Eva. So the Eva, and also I should note, normally Evangelion units like Unit 0 or Unit 2 or any of the other units, they're created from Adam. They're based on Adam, and they're using pieces of Adam or recreations of Adam to an extent to be that biological underpinning. So that's why they have the angel powers they have, but they're different than normal angels in that they don't have that red core. They not normally, not at first. That S2 drive is what they call it. And that's what generates a lot of the angels' special matter bending quantum powers. They don't have that, but they are an approximation of Adam. Evangelion Unit 1, while still designed like in a similar way like Adam, is actually built from Lilith, which makes it special. Instead. So it's a melding of Lilith's sort of biology or structure, along with aspects of Adam to keep it in line with other Evas, and the soul of Shinji's mother, Yui Akari. Now, I mentioned Rei is a little different. That's because Rei is revealed to be a clone of Yui Akari. And those clones initially are these sort of body clone dummies. They don't have souls. But Rei is actually, her soul comes from Lilith. So in a weird way, Rei is like the opposite of Shinji's Unit 1. Whereas Unit 1, the Evangelion, is the body of Lilith, or with the soul of Yui. Rei is a clone of Yui's body with the soul of Lilith. Now, what the soul that's in Unit 0, there's never been a clear, direct answer. That's Rei's Evangelion. But the speculation is that's the soul that was used to create it was the original soul of the original Rei. Because Rei, like I said, there's a clone. It's a clone. There's many clone duplicates. But the first one that was brought to life, which, fans call Rei 1, was killed. I'm not going to get into that whole thing. It's not really important right now. And that soul might have been bonded to Unit 0, but only a slice of the soul. The rest of the remainder of that soul, the Lilith, the soul that originally came from Lilith, was put into what Rei 2, which is the Rei you see for most of the 26 episodes. Actually, that Rei then dies, then the final episodes are with a Rei called Rei 3. Won't get into that too much. But yeah, the soul of Rei, Eva Unit 1 has the soul of Shinji's mother. Eva Unit 2 has the soul of Asuka's mother. And presumably, Eva Unit 3, which is introduced later in the series, has the soul of its pilot's mother. And that pilot is Toji Suzuhara in the original series. I don't know if I have time really to get into Toji, but he's just a classmate of Shinji, and what you learn is everyone in Shinji's class at school is a person with a deceased mother, presumably because they're basically a bank of spare pilots to pilot Evas. And you're wondering, like, well, why are they all like 14-year-old? Well, it's like this during start of puberty time. It's like there's enough consciousness there, but there's still this dependency, and that kind of helps the bond the soul to the mother because it's in that Freudian model. So in other words, Shinji's whole relationship to the Eva is symbolic of his mommy issues and his Oedipus complex and his fear of the other. He longs to be in the womb again of his mother. So every time he goes in the entry plug of the Eva, he's going into his mother's womb, essentially. And that entry plug is filled with LCL, which is that substance I mentioned earlier. It looks like orange tang water is what fans usually joke about. But that stuff is the essence of all life, the primordial ooze, but it's also a special liquid that helps that quantum sort of psychic connection stuff that we talked about, as well as being like, it's hard to explain everything about LCL, but it has a lot of strange properties, but it all kind of takes its root in this idea that it's the fluid in the womb. It's the fluid that is the primordial soup. It's all these things metaphorically and then also quite literally. And so when the Eva pilot is syncing with the Eva, the higher the sync rate, the more they themselves physically stop to exist, and their consciousness just becomes attached to the LCL. So when I talk about Nerve and Sele and their goals for this human instrumentality project, which is the result of a third impact, their ultimate goal is to essentially erase all people's AT fields, to basically erase all separation between people and their souls, essentially becoming one unified being through the LCL. They just boom, it's like you're just pure consciousness, just one unified consciousness for everybody. And that sounds insane, it's because it is, but it makes sense in this sort of psychological escapism way. It's like all our trauma, all our anxieties and fears come from that at their root, this sense of separation that we all feel. So it seems like nirvana would be to have a truly painless existence where you are all that separation from other people is essentially erased, and you're just this pure consciousness, this pure LCL liquid. And it's basically bringing you back to the beginning, because we started in the primordial ooze that in this context came from Lilith, and we've returned to that is the goal of Sele. So Sele is essentially this strange religious death cult, and Gendo, Shinji's father, who leads Nerve, works with them to achieve that goal. But what you find out is that while Gendo also wants human instrumentality, his version of it, he has a separate competing version of its execution that instead centers on him and his desire to reunite with Yui. So it's like he's willing to sacrifice everyone else's consciousness and existence or body and the entire world just so he can have his soul reunite with Yui's soul. Yui, who, he lost by when she, quote, died and merged with Unit 1. So all that to say, that's why he also knew he needed Shinji, because that's her literal son, is the one who would have the highest just innate synchronization rate with the soul in Unit 1. Same thing with Asuka with her unit, same thing with Toji and his, etc. Yeah, so that's the basic gist of Evangelion. There's a lot more, and a lot more to say about what's amazing about the series, how that functions, how that psychology gets to. I guess where I want to conclude before I jump on this part is just explaining how that Neon Genesis Evangelion TV series ends, what that means in terms of the end of Evangelion, and then how we get to rebuilds, because that's all necessary to explain before I can even talk about Rebuild, the final movie. Okay, so like I said, the second half of the original TV series starts to focus a lot more on psychology and what it means to be Shinji in this depressed existence. And, a lot of that was seemingly coming from the creator himself, Hideaki Anno's own struggles with depression and need for therapy and self-therapizing himself through the show and breaking down his own alienated, difficult existence, his fear of others, all those things. It's a very intertwined with its creator. And the series was getting very experimental, but he was also, like I said, building up this sort of plot in the background with all this lore and how he's going to kind of unpack this whole thing with Sele and the third impact and human instrumentality project. So in the episode 24 of 26, he introduces a new character who only exists in that episode, at least formally, named Kaoru Nagisa, who's supposed to be this final Eva pilot who comes into the story, and he immediately has this sort of very forwardly gay attraction to Shinji because Shinji's so lonely and depressed already at that point. Because as the series goes on, Shinji's alienation and loneliness and depression only increases because of the traumatic things that happen to Eva, including an event where I mentioned Eva Unit 3 and Toji. He is forced to harm him because that Eva unit gets taken over by an angel, and his father basically bullies him into hurting his friend. And that traumatizes him. He rebels. That rebellion causes during a fight with one of the toughest angels that anyone fought, that even Asuka and Rei aren't able to take down. Shinji's Eva 1 again awakens, just like it did in the first episode, but this time it fully awakens. And Shinji, like I said, his sync rate goes so high that his whole body essentially disappears, and his consciousness essentially merges with Unit 1, and you get this really crazy psychological set piece of dissecting all his anxieties, his worries of his mother separation, his hatred of his father, that Oedipus complex, but also the complicated psychosexuality that exists between him and the other three major female characters, his two other pilots, Rei and Asuka, and also his surrogate mother figure who has inappropriate sexualizing towards him and herself, Masato, right? So it breaks down all this complicated psychosexuality between them, and how it continues to cause Shinji this confusion that causes him this alienation and this increased need to retreat and become depressed. So when Kaoru shows up, Shinji's just in very much a need of a reprieve from all that, and Kaoru's just kind to him, and even his sexual forwardness towards Shinji seemingly doesn't throw him off. Maybe Shinji has some bi-curiosity. I don't know. That's been a long fan debate. But either way, it's like he's vulnerable and needs someone who's nice to him, and Kaoru is that. But again, Kaoru is revealed to be an angel himself. He is like the same way Rei comes from Lilith. He is a human, basically a humanoid body with the soul of Adam, the first angel, and is himself the 17th and final angel that Nerve needs to kill in order to bring about their plans for the third impact and human instrumentality. So Shinji is forced to kill him, and part of what motivates him is the feeling that Kaoru betrayed him because he didn't tell him about who he truly was and all that stuff. So Shinji kills Kaoru. Now, this would lead into episode 25 and 26. But at the time when the original series was being made, there was just not enough time really to do the story that Anno had originally planned, and there was other factors. There's a lot of debate about exactly what caused this, but essentially what came out for when the TV series originally ran, the final episode 25 to 26, those last two episodes basically represent the climax of the story, this human instrumentality project, entirely from the perspective of the character's own internal monologues, and using all that avant-garde filmmaking, experimental mental stuff that I mentioned had already been seeping into the series more and more. This just goes entirely there for over 2 straight episodes. The last 2 episodes, the whole show, it's just purely that. And it's basically just Shinji therapizing himself to solve his problems. And where 26 eventually ends is, it seems like he discovers, yes, I finally understand myself, and I'm not perfect, but I am ready to get back out into the world and make friends and value my relationships. And it's like supposed to be this life-affirming thing. And it's like this very famous sort of memeable scene where every character's like clapping for him. Congratulations, congratulations. And that's how it ended. And people fucking hated it. They were thrown off and confused. They're like, where did all that plot go? What was happening? There seemed like a lot was being set up in the last couple episodes before this that was not paid off. I don't know what was happening. It was just all mental bullshit. It was all just therapy nonsense. And also these episodes were done with a lot of experimental style that a lot of people say was due to budget cuts or time constraints, where it's like incomplete animation. It's like storyboards being like slideshowed through and all sorts of other otherwise aesthetically seemingly incomplete animation. So people were like, what the fuck happened? The money run out? Time run out? What do? We need a new ending. Like, this is bullshit. This is not the real ending. Now, I don't think it was due directly to fan pressure, from what I understand, though the fan pressure was there. But Anno decided, no, I still want to tell the story as I originally planned it. So once we get stuff in order, and it took a little while, I'm going to create a movie. And during that time, he also re-edited the existing episodes into a special release movie called I think Death, Evangelion Death, and then there was an extended version of that called Death and Rebirth that included the first like 20-ish minutes of what would become the actual movie, The End of Evangelion. Now, what The End of Evangelion, the movie, is, that came out in 1997, and this was, for all intents and purposes at the time, the end. It was essentially a redo of episode 25 and 26 was the premise. Like, when you watch it, it's like, the first part, the movie's split into 2 halves. The first part is called episode 25. And the second part is called episode 26 with like a little comma on it, which the comma denotes is also lines up with the special director's cut versions of several of the previous last episodes of the TV series that add a couple extra scenes and better animation that make it kind of align more with what would become the End of Evangelion, right? So that End of Evangelion is essentially an alternate version of episode 25 to 26. How you're supposed to interpret that with regards to the original 25-26, there's a couple different common fan answers. The one I tend to use is episode 25-26 are kind of, if you're watching the series for the first time, I do think you should watch it as it was released. So you watch all episodes 1 through 24 of the original series, then the original 24-26 ending, and then watch the Evangelion. If you want to just really make sure that flows well, maybe go back and rewatch episodes 21 through 24. Then, instead of watching the last two, 25 and 26 of the series, watch the movie version of 25 and 26, which is the end of Evangelion. But they're kind of like a sort of like not mutually exclusive versions of the ending, though. If you really just want to understand the story, plot, and what I think is like the definitive version, because that's the thing. I look at End of Evangelion as the definitive ending to the original Neon Genesis Evangelion story and continuity. I'm going to get to that in a second. 25 and 26 are sort of like almost like bonus viewing. Some people have said, oh, you can watch episode 25, 26 by like pausing the middle of the Evangelion when it gets to a certain part where human instrumentality begins proper, and then insert them there. I don't like that. It doesn't really tonally work, because the End of Evangelion, let's talk about it for a second. The End of Evangelion, the movie that came out in 1997, is a fucking masterpiece. It's one of the most insane movies you've ever seen in your life. It won't make any sense to you if you haven't watched episodes 1 through 24 of the original series, or also 25, 26. You don't need to watch 25, 26, my point. It's meant to be the replacement for those episodes in many senses. So that's the, quote, real version of episode 25 and 26, the End of Evangelion. But the point is, the movie is just this masterpiece, and it's infamously known for being an insane, trippy, super dark, super disturbing imagery kind of movie. It's like nothing you've ever seen if you haven't seen it. It's like serious cosmic horror shit. Because, like, look, you can watch the first 24 episodes of Evangelion, and there's some imagery and moments, especially in those director's cuts, which, like I said, were produced to kind of lead into Evangelion, of, like, where that sort of trippy psychological stuff gets more tangibly kind of visual horror-minded. But End of Evangelion takes that to a new place, because that whole premise is the third impact and the human instrumentality project. And the way that works is it's like these insane sort of like sci-fi religious ritual things that lead to just absolute trippy imagery of like giant beings and blood and vaginas on hands and like needle things going through eyeballs, and it's fucked up if you've never seen it. Now, like, I've seen it so many times, I'm pretty immune to some of that stuff, but the first time I saw it, I was like, oh my god, this is intense. The film famously opens with a scene. It's also just incredibly, seemingly, because I want to make a point about this, seemingly nihilistic in tone, even with its characters. The movie famously opens with Shinji, again, and after killing Kaoru, so now even more like depressed than ever, is just totally alone and isolated. The city of Tokyo 3 itself is already destroyed because of the angel attacks. It's just like, there's nothing. All his friends, Toji and Kensuke, they're all gone. There's nothing for him. And Asuka, who we didn't really talk about her character arc, but her character arc that plays through the last couple of episodes of Evangelion before End of Eva, is a reckoning, because she's, like I said, she's this overconfident bully type. In anime, I guess they called the stereotype that, I don't know if she invented it, but she's definitely the example. Sunundre, it's Tsundre. I don't think I'm not pronouncing it right. Whatever it is. It's this, like, basically girls who are mean to boys because they secretly like them. So it's like she secretly likes Shinji, so she's just mean to him. But it goes more than that. Like, she's very overconfident. She thinks of herself, being an Eva pilot and being the best is her identity. And so Shinji repeatedly shows her up. So she repeatedly starts to feel useless. And this eventually goes to a point where it connects to her own past traumas, where, like I mentioned, like Shinji, her mother died. But in her case, Asuka remembers her mother killed herself, she had suffered from a mental breakdown and killed herself, and tried to convince Asuka to kill herself too. And Asuka was like a 4-year-old girl at the time. So it's really fucked up. And even worse, her father basically wasted no time before he started sleeping with his wife's doctor, and then remarried. And so she just has grown up with a life of really fucked up stuff. So she's very insecure at her core. And all this leads to her to essentially try to commit suicide. So during episode 24, when we see Asuka, she's literally bleeding out from her wrist, but agents of NERV find her and bring her to the hospital, so she doesn't die. So she's in the hospital at the start of Evangelion. This is the opening scene of the movie. Shinji goes in to see her. He's desperate. He needs Asuka. He misses Asuka's bullying, because that's the thing you have to understand, and this is what Eva gets so right psychologically. It's like, Shinji, especially because he's so depressed and lonely, he'll take anything that generates affection, and in fact, an abusive affection is preferable. He wants pain, he wants suffering, but he wants it to be, again, something he can rely on, is something he can cling to. And Asuka, because she's unconscious, she's not providing it, so he's like trying to shake her body in the hospital, her unconscious body, and as he's doing it, he accidentally like flips her over, and her hospital gown loosens and reveals her breasts. And Shinji, and something that probably only depressed teenage boys can understand, and not condoning this at all, it's incredibly fucked up, and Shinji is a sex criminal for doing it, locks himself in the hospital room and masturbates, and you literally see the cum on his hands. I shit you not. And famously in the original ADV dub, the line he says is, "I'm so fucked up." Or in the Netflix dub, which I've seen, is "I'm the lowest of the low." And the point is, like, yeah, this is character just basically succumbing to their worst self intentionally, almost. That's how the movie starts. The rest of the movie then proceeds with an assault on NERV by UN agents that are under the control of Seele, slaughtering everybody. Misato trying to get Shinji to get in the Eva to save them, but Shinji just being so dejected and depressed that he won't even move. He's basically catatonic. He's like a walking dead. And Misato gets shot. And this is kind of the end of Misato's arc in this movie. Misato gets shot, and her last thing is to push Shinji to the cage so he can get on the Eva. And before she does it, she essentially makes out with him to give him courage. It's a very sexually problematic thing, in line with her character, who had earlier in like episode 23 basically offered him sex in order to get him to feel better because he was depressed. Like, this is the fucked up shit with Misato, whose own daddy issues and complicated sort of character psychology is unpacked in those episodes. But she's Shinji's mother, so it's like, again, have sex with me, your mother. Very complicated. But again, the movie, I think, uses all this stuff to good effect, as messed up as it is. It's not just, I think people misunderstand its intention. It's not trying to be nihilistic. That scene, even with Misato, is meant to be hopeful inspiration, as fucked up as it is. So yeah, Shinji gets in the Eva, but he's not able to do anything. Asuka had been fighting in the Eva alone, because basically what happened with her is, after slipping into suicidal depression, she realizes that her mother's spirit is in the Eva. She didn't know that. And it just awakens this new sense of like, no, my mother does love me, because it actually turns out that the soul, the part of her soul that's in her Eva, is the part that was the part that kind of recognized her daughter and her family, which is why when her mother lost that piece of her soul, she became psychotic and killed herself and all that. But yeah, so Asuka has this moment of ecstasy, and then is immediately launched into an overwhelming fight with these, what they call the mass-produced Evas. These are like these angel beast-like things that Seele created to carry out their plans. Asuka's like just violently taking them apart, but it doesn't matter because they can regenerate, because they have these S2 drives like the angels, and they eventually overwhelm and overpower Asuka, start tearing her apart. Like, her Eva's like bio organs are getting dug up. It's like some fucking like crows tearing up a body thing, just like dark religious cosmic horror-y imagery. And Shinji is taken up by these things in his Eva and used as the sacrificial medium to begin this dark ritual rite, this cosmic dark ritual. So that's when the movie bursts into full-blown cosmic horror. And he lets you know, because Shinji lets out a scream like you've never heard. And for the next 45 minutes, it's just pure hellscape imagery and just insanity. And it's all meant to symbolize as the song that plays during the main sort of third impact human instrumentality segment, an original song with a German title called Komm Susser Tod, which means "Come Sweet Death." And the lyrics, which are in English, are talking about basically just being depressed and like it's kind of like a weirdly happy, almost like Beatles sounding song, ironically, but it's about basically being like giving up on life and deciding all your friends are worth nothing and you should just kill yourself. And it's all good. It's basically celebrating the idea of death because it's like, hey, it all returns to nothing. Like literally the refrain is, it all returns to nothing. I just keep letting me down, letting me down, letting me down. If you've never heard this song, well, definitely experience it the first time in the movie, but you're going to want to listen to it, even despite how depressed it is, because it's like one of those things where it's a very happy, upbeat sounding song until you listen to the lyrics. And then obviously evokes the imagery you remember with the movie. You watch all the people and Nerve, the ones that are still alive, melt into that LCL Tang stuff. And it's like meant to resent what's happening is their bodies are disappearing and their consciousness is becoming part of this collective consciousness, right? Gendo tries to do his version of it to reunite with Yui, but he's rejected. And so Rei, who at this point is very bonded to Shinji, decides no, she becomes this big cosmic god and decides no, Shinji will be in control of instrumentality, which means the decision of how instrumentality would proceed or not proceed is in the hands of a depressed teenager who wants to kill himself already. So it's like, not only will he be able to kill himself, he'll be able to basically be the singular consciousness of all consciousness and all life on Earth and everything will just disappear. And so this big cosmic crazy experience, the end of Evangelion. But it ultimately ends with Shinji realizing, no, just like he did in the original episodes 25 to 26, but with a very different tone. No, I think I want to live. I accept that other people exist, and I know it's going to make me feel fearful and anxious, but I can deal with that. I can deal with it. And at that point, it, I think, turns into a rather beautiful, though, like the tone and the way it's represented is very bittersweet and sad thing where he realizes, yes, my mother's soul is in Eva Unit 1 and I'm going to let her go. So the Eva's going to drift off into space and I'm going to be drifted off from my mother forever. But I'll remember being in the womb and I'll hold that feeling and what it means to be alive and I'll value my life. So Shinji reconstitutes his body and he awakens on the desolate, blood-stained earth. The oceans are literally red. And the only person left next to him, this is the end, how the end of Evangelion ends. The only person left is Asuka. Now, there's a lot of ways to interpret what's going on here. I'll just say my interpretation, even before I saw this final Eva movie, the new one, was always that, though this still holds, I think, and it's in the text of End of Evangelion, the 97 film, anyone can come back. It's just a matter of will they? Will they leave that consciousness? Shinji's opened the door for other people to come back, but the only people that are back when he comes back are just him and Asuka, and they're left looking at the ruins of the surf. There's like a very famous imagery where it's like the giant cosmic god version of Rei. Her face is like cut in half, just like laying on the landscape, this red landscape at night. And Asuka's there, but she's like banged up. She's missing her eye. It's like there's like a medical patch over it. And Shinji's just like realizing he's totally alone but for Asuka. And he starts to cry and he doesn't know what to do. So he goes back to the thing. Even though he's like, quote, gotten better, the only thing he knows to do to get affection or express affection is violence or sort of almost seemingly spiteful things. So he starts choking Asuka on the ground. But the choking actually kind of wakes her up and she strokes his cheek almost lovingly for a second. And he starts to cry and breaks down. And Asuka, just this is literally how the movie cuts to end title card and just boom, just says disgusting. Now again, a lot of people take that line and interpret it to mean this very negative ending. I think that's only half of it, or that's not a mutually exclusive thing. It's like it's this act of compassion. Yes, Shinji's finally choking her, but it's just him trying to connect with somebody in the only way he knows how at this point because he's so broken. And she just gives him that sweet cheek caress, and it lets him know it's going to be okay, that she's there. But at the same time, look around them and like look what it took. Look where he is. He is in fact disgusting. Man's existence is in some sense disgusting. But I think what the film is not trying to say that means we should just nihilistically end it all. I think it's saying this is what we got and we have to accept it even if it's disgusting. So that's my interpretation of the end of Eva. But I'll just, or at least a short version of it, believe it or not. But I'll just say that really the point I'm bringing about discussing that ending is that to a lot of people is this very dark nihilistic thing. I think like with episode 25 and 26, it was Anno, or the whole series, the original TV series, it was Anno in some ways dealing with his own suicidal depression and anxiety and alienation. And he was expressing it the way he knew how through his art. And I think he is looking for that message of hope. And whereas in the original episode 25 and 26, he was trying to force it in there. In this case, he's like finding it, but just recognizing that it's so hard won that I'm not going to belabor it. The best I can choose is just to choose to deal with the world as it is, even if it's horrifying. But that was Anno in 1997. And I think it wasn't too long after that, and also just like needing to kind of build his new studio in the animation industry and try to figure out how to make that work. So there's a lot of like real world behind the scenes thing that went into this. But I think there's always a part of him that, especially as his life improved and he became more mature and he got married and all these things, like he became a better, more developed person. I think he wanted to revisit his story and see where he could maybe change what he did and put in a new direction. And so that's how you get to the rebuild of Evangelion movies, which are essentially remakes of the original story. But they're more than that, you see. Because while the first rebuild movie, titled in English Evangelion 1.0, You Are Not Alone, is more or less an incredibly faithful, almost one-to-one, shot-for-shot remake of the first 6 episodes of the TV series. Right away, there was little changes, little things that hinted that maybe it's not just that. Maybe in some weird way, this is a sequel to the End of Evangelion. So how does that make sense? Well, what if time was reset or things are repeating but in continuity? And the reason people started thinking this was for a couple reasons. One of the things, there's little differences that you notice right away in Eva Unit 1 in terms of the way the world and the lore is set up. The lore, a lot of it's the same, but there's little differences. One of them being the second impact in the lore of Rebuild turned the oceans red, meaning they resemble the red blood-colored ocean you see at the end of Evangelion. Also, there's a lot of other lore differences I'm not going to get into. But at the end of the film, you're introduced to Kaoru early, because Kaoru is not introduced to episode 24 of the original series. And the way you're introduced to him is you see him awaken from a coffin on the moon where there's a blood stain through. A blood stain that matches the blood stain that you see on the moon at the end of Evangelion. And Kaoru literally says, "Oh, Shinji, I cannot wait to see you again," as though he's already met him. And the way there's these coffins, like he's in a row of coffins. He awakens out of one. Half of the row behind him is empty coffins, and the half of the row in front is still sealed coffins. So it's like, wait a minute, is this like Kaoru reawakening? Are there multiple Kaorus? Like, what's going on here? That's the way the first movie ends. The second movie, Evangelion 2.0, You Cannot Advance, more or less follows the episodes 8 through 19 of the original series, but with more changes. A lot of it just cutting out a lot of those, like, again, that mid-series Eva battles with just Rei and Asuka, reduces them to just a couple key ones. But it also introduces a new pilot named Mari, with a pink Eva. She's an interesting character we're going to talk a lot about when I review the fourth film, but I'll leave that out for now. But it introduces more changes, most notably the way it ends. It essentially ends with same thing that happens in episode 19 of the series, but a major difference. All of a sudden, when Unit 1 awakens in that beast mode, it's not just a beast mode. It like sort of becomes this new god mode Eva. and Shinji in this desperation to save Rei, because unlike in the original episode 19, Rei's not just like injured in the fight, she's like literally seemingly killed, like eaten by the Eva. Like the Eva bites her Unit Zero in half and like she's taken into it. Or sorry, not the Eva, the Angel. And as a result of that, Shinji like loses his shit and decides, I need Rei back. And there's this whole thing in Rebuilds, particularly in 2.0, where it's seeming like Shinji has like a romantic attachment to Rei that he never really had in the original series. Which at the time makes 2.0 feel like a much more like cookie cutter sort of thing. In hindsight, because there's certain information revealed in the final movie that makes it make more sense, but I won't get into that just yet. But yeah, this causes Shinji to kind of snap. He's the one who initiates the change in the Eva. And when the Eva changes in this God mode, it starts to cause the third impact. So the third impact starts to happen, and if you're comparing it to the original series, like 5 episodes early. And you're like, what the hell? This is different. And this ends in this cliffhanger where, like, what the hell just happened? Did the third impact really happen? Or did they stop it before it got too big to, like, cause all that? Like, what went on? Well, the third movie, Evangelion 3.0, You Cannot Redo, answers that question by skipping ahead 14 years, a 14-year time skip. Now, I don't think I'm going to get too much into the 3.0 thing right now. I think I'll save that for part 2 when I unpack the final movie, the 4th film, because it's necessary to kind of set that up better. But just to say, this really alienated fans because while, like I said, the first 2 movies kind of faithfully recreate the TV show, though 2.0 features a lot more changes and things and has that ending, 3.0 is basically a fully original thing. Now, I think you look back at it structurally, it's really just a reimagining of episode 24, in my opinion, with little elements of episodes like 21 through 23 sprinkled here and there. But it's mainly meant as a stand-in for episode 24, that Kaoru episode of the original series, and just expands that idea. But where the radical change comes into the fact that it's basically a whole new world where it's 14 years later, the Eva pilots like Asuka and Kaoru and Shinji haven't aged. Now, Shinji hasn't aged because he's basically been asleep for 14 years. So when he wakes up, he has no idea what's going on. He doesn't know it's even been 14 years. He has no idea. And he's like, what happened? Did the third impact happen? Why is everyone mad at me? The whole planet's now red, so something fucking happened bad. And everyone hates Shinji. They're all fucking mad at him. And he's like confused and dejected. And it's a really strange thing, totally different story. And again, it alienated a lot of fans at the time, but I've always been a big fan of this movie, 3.0. I think up before this final film was the best of the rebuilds, in my opinion, and one of the best Evangelion products, period, right up there with End of Evangelion. Not nearly as good as that, but like a kind of interesting pivot, and showed that Anno was serious about Rebuild not just being a rehash of the original series, but a follow-up to it. Because it's kind of like now taking this really different approach, like a different story, and by advancing 14 years, it kind of puts the series more in line with the fact that this is a saga that's been going on for a long time. Like, the Eva pilots, because 14 years passed, should be adults now, but they're not. They're still in these 14-year-old bodies. And so there's a sort of an interesting explanation for that that's kind of vague, but I look at the meta text here, because Anno, and you will see in the final film when I unpack that, is an incredibly meta exercise. It's really all about the fact that Eva pilots are stuck as children. What does that say about the fans who, like, years later, after Evangelion should have ended, are still clamoring for it, still buying all this merchandise? That's the thing. Evangelion in Japan is a money printing machine. You can get Eva anything. Name an object, there's an Eva version of it. There's Eva commercials for everything under the sun. It's like one of the biggest franchises ever, just prints money there. So it's a huge cultural phenomenon. And for Anno, who's trying to make serious art, and art that says something, and art that has a message, it's kind of at odds with that. And so, he's able to make these rebuild films what they are and have the budgets they have, which is insane. Because, like, I should say, these rebuild films are like anime like you don't see anywhere else, because no one else has the resources and time to create anime this complex and beautiful, really, other than Studio Ghibli. And I would argue that they've done things here that, like, while different, in some ways surpasses Ghibli. and is the successor to Ghibli. I think the final film, as I'm going to talk about, really makes that clear. But the point is, Anno's kind of at odds. His message is kind of at odds with the popularity of the series, and so I think where he's kind of goes with this, the third movie and the fourth and final film is like, let me really reckon with that. That's why I wanted to skip ahead 14 years, because I wanted to really draw attention to this idea that the Eva pilots can't be 14-year-old kids forever. Like, we need to grow up. We need to end this. And obviously he's the one who decided to make this story and tell an ending. And I think when you see the final film, you realize, oh, he had an ending to tell. But it's an ending that is in conversation with the fact, why do I need to do this at all? Why are people into Eva? Like, what is all this? So yeah, I think that's a good way to, I did something to illuminate the very complicated, convoluted Evangelion franchise for you. Its lore a bit, its story a bit, and the behind the scenes a bit. But when I come back, I'm going to break down and give my full thoughts on Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0, Thrice Upon a Time. And if that title's not a clue, it's the third time Anno has attempted to end the series. First in the original 26 episodes, then in the End of Evangelion definitive director's cut version of episode 25-26, and then fucking after doing 3 other rebuild films, finally here. And this is the thing, and I knew this going in, it was like kind of apparent no matter how you were interpreting rebuilds and the changes and the quote sequel theory, the idea that it actually does follow End of Evangelion and somehow time got reset. All those things are kind of answered in the final film, I'll say. And it's pretty interesting where they end up with it. And I was a big believer in it, and I was rewarded for that belief. So really, the end of the 3.0 plus 1.0, the end of the rebuild series, is the true ending of all of Evangelion. So it's ending a story that started in 1995. It's been that long coming. That's why there's so much hype and anticipation around it. It's like, this is the final statement on Evangelion and what the story means and where Anno is as a person. I think it really shows. So stay tuned for that, for my Evangelion review of the final film.